Okay, Exile chapter 7. Okay. Sophie had been in quiet places before, but she'd never experienced anything like the silence of the wandering woods. There was no chirping or tweeting, no branches creaking or rustling. It was like all sound, all life, had been sucked out of the scenery, leaving nothing but a thick, almost tangible emptiness. Even the silver pebbles didn't crunch under their feet as she followed Grady and Adeline down a winding path, which seemed to glow as she moved, shining the way to the narrow gateway ahead. A vine with white star-shaped flowers trailed up two blighted columns to an arched gold sign with looping intricate letters that spelled out, "Those who wander are not lost." "I've heard that before," Sophie said, mostly to herself. She racked her brain, needing to be sure if it was her own memory, not something someone put there. An image of sort poem flashed in her mind, and she stopped walking. "That's from The Lord of the Rings." "Well, not exactly, but it's close." "The Lord of the Rings?" Adeline repeated. "It's a series of human books, and it has elves in it. Elves that had some similarities to what elves really were." Now that she thought about it. "Are the books older?" Grady asked. "I think Tolkien wrote them during the 1930s or 40s. That's back before the Human Assistance Program was banned." Grady smiled when her eyebrows shot up. We used to send members of the nobility in disguise to try to teach humans our ways. The treaties had fallen apart, but we still hoped to guide them, bringing them out of the darkness and into a new age of light. In fact, most of the great human innovations of the last few centuries happened under elven tutelage. Electricity, penicillin, chocolate cake. But too many of our gifts backfired, and a few decades ago the problem escalated to a point where the council had no choice but to terminate the program and ban all human contact. What does that have to do with the Lord of the Rings? Let's just say we're some who couldn't resist manipulating the legends about elves a bit. So you're saying J.R.R. Tolkien met an elf, and that's where he came up with some of the story? I wouldn't be surprised, though I'm sure he was only told bits and pieces. Do the book talk about the wanderlings at all? I don't think so. Then he didn't know what the statement meant. Grady motioned for her to follow him. Adeline trailed silently behind as they crossed under the arch and entered the woods. "These are the wanderlings," Grady whispered. It was unlike any forest Sophie had ever seen. The glowing path wound through a sea of carefully arranged trees, each one surrounded by meticulously groomed shrubs. No two trees were alike. Some were short and broad, others tall and slender. Some had graceful branches that swayed in the silent breeze. Others looked stout and strong. There were leaves in every shape, size, and color. Some had flowers. Even one had thorns. And at the base of each tree was a round white stone with the name carved in plain black letters. Grady led Sophie to the nearest tree, which reminded her of a weeping willow. If weeping willows had red leaves and bloomed with thousands of tiny purple flowers. Each wanderling seed is coiled with a single hair from the one who's been lost, he explained. When it sprouts, it absorbs their DNA, taking on some of the attributes of the life they now share, letting the lost live on. Those who wander are not lost. Kara had straight auburn hair, Eileen whispered, running her hand through the swaying red leaves, and flecks of velvet in her eyes. Soft purple petals were showed them, and Sophie caught as many as she could, hating that they would wither on the ground. Did you know her? Brady brushed the bits of flower off his cape. Not well. She was Prentice's wife. The petals slipped through Sophie's fingers. Prentice had been a keeper for the Black Swan, back before everyone knew they were working against the real rebels. Now he lived in exile, his mind shattered by the memory break that the council had ordered so they could find out what he was hiding. And the secret he'd refused to tell them was her. Where they hid her. Why they made her. Who she was. His wife died not long after his mind was shattered. Lost her concentration during a light leap somehow and faded away before anyone could save her. Leaving Wild, their only son, orphaned. Sophie had never met him. He was in the Exile towers at Foxfire and lived in the sexual Idol towers. But she sometimes wondered if he knew she existed and how he felt about her if he did. She looked up, and a ray of sunlight caught her eyes, sinking into her brain, and pulsing with that same headache she kept getting. Are you okay? Grady asked as she rubbed her temples. Sure. She focused on the forest, surprised to realize how many trees there were. There had to be at least 100 spread among the meandering hills and carefully manicured bushes. It seemed like a lot, but the wandering woods was the only graveyard. Could they really have only lost 100 elves in all the centuries they'd been alive? She reached for Grady's and Adeline's hands. They held on tight and moved slowly down the path, their glassy eyes staring straight ahead. The path twisted through the quiet forest, leading them through patches of shadow and light until they rounded a large bend and entered a small sunlit clearing. A lump formed in Sophie's throat. Elevated on a small hill and silhouetted against the sky was a fragile-looking tree with pale bark, dark green leaves, and slender limbs that fanned out toward the sun. Soft yellow leaves draped off the end of each bough, like Spanish moss, making the tree elegant and wispy. And large blossoms, like the exact same blue as Adeline's eyes, blanketed the branches, filling the air with a scent like honey and berries and sugar. The graceful tree blocked the early afternoon sun as they approached. Sophie couldn't take her eyes off the inscription on the white stone, marking the grave. Julie Lucaine Rouen. Without a word, Adeline opened the satchel she'd been carrying and removed a clear, fluted bottle filled with a deep purple liquid. A special tonic the gnomes make, Grady explained. Adeline popped the cork and drizzled the thick syrup along the base of the tree. When the last of the liquid had drained, she smacked the bottle against the tree's trunk. The glass shredded into a million tiny flecks, sprinkling the wet grass, and the sparkle-coated syrup sank into the ground. A bright green vine sprang from the dark soil and slowly coiled its way up the bark of Julie's tree. Ruffled purple flowers bloomed along the stem, and every inch of the vine gleamed like it had been covered in glitter. Grady wiped his eyes as he took Adeline's hand. The vine only lasts a few weeks, but it's the best gift we could give her. Plus this, Adeline's voice was barely audible as she gently pulled one of the branches down, revealing a silver charm bracelet tucked between the blossoms. She removed a tiny crystal star from her pocket and added it to the already full chain. We gave her this bracelet when she started Foxfire, and we bought her a new charm every year on the first day of school. She used to wear it every day, but we found it when they gave us her things from the Edel Towers. So we brought it here and give her a new charm every time we come. Sophie bit her lip, wondering if she should say something. But what? "I'm so sorry," was all she could come up with. "It's not your fault," Grady told her, squeezing her shoulder. But something in his tone had darkened. Adeline started to shake with sobs, and Grady pulled her against him, letting her cry on his shoulder. "I'll give you a minute," Sophie whispered, backing away. She thought she could help by being there, but nothing would ever make it less painful. And Julie's loss was theirs. She didn't belong. She slipped quietly down the path, trying to remember which way to take her to the entrance. She wound through the trees for several minutes before she realized she didn't recognize any of them. Turning back didn't help, and as she turned around yet again and still didn't recognize anything, she was forced to admit that she was lost, and she was alone. She'd been wishing for solitude since the kidnapping, but standing there by herself in the eerie silence felt wrong, like the woods were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. She wasn't about to stick around and find out what it was. Running down and crushing herself While cursing herself for wearing the stupid heels, she raced up the nearest hill, hoping she'd been high enough to get her bearings. But two small trees planted side by side at the crest distracted her. Saplings. Her blood turned to ice when she read the names carved into the white stone markers. Sophie Elizabeth Foster and Dexter Alvin Disney. That's the end of chapter 7. Hope you enjoyed reading it and keep on listening for more details.